Hello, I'm Andrea Gonzalez with Trellis Strategies. Thank you for joining our discussion today. We're in our fourth Trellis Strategies discussion series, and in this series, we're discussing institutional transformation to empower modern learners. Today's discussion is our third in this series, and we'll specifically be discussing how institutional transformation can assist in creating a more fiscally sustainable campus while providing affordability for students. And our discussion will be led by our president and CEO, Dr. Debra Chromy. Participant videos are off, but we encourage you to share questions or comments in chat and the Q&A. We will respond to those at the end of our discussion. We will leave time to get to those. It's 12:02. I think I'll go ahead and hand it over to you, Debra. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Andrea. And thanks for coordinating all of this and bringing it all together. As Andrea mentioned, my name is Debra Chromy. I'm president and CEO here at Trellis. For those of you who have participated in our discussion series in the past, welcome back. And for those that are joining for the first time, you are about to find out why people come back. This is going to be a very engaging and informative discussion. We're going to start this discussion, as Andrea mentioned, with a little bit about affordability, and then transition into a discussion about interventions and examples of institutional transformation that has been successful in addressing, at least in part, issues of affordability. So as I kick this off, as you know, affordability is a key driver of institutional transformation. As both the direct and indirect costs of post-secondary education continue to rise, there's a growing scrutiny around the return on investment of a degree or a credential, probably today more so than ever. And today, we're really lucky to have with us three expert panelists who will help us explore how institutional transformation can lead to a more fiscally sustainable campus while improving affordability for students. So I'm going to do a quick intro for each of them, starting with Justin Draeger, who for the most part I think needs no introduction, but he is currently Senior Vice President of Affordability at Strada Education Foundation. Justin focuses on connecting individuals to opportunity by making post-secondary education more affordable and accessible. Justin joined Strada in 2024 after spending more than 14 years as president and CEO at the National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators. Thank you. It's good to have you with us, Justin.
Thank you.
Next, I have Kristin Hultquist, who is a founding partner of HCM Strategists. Kristin is a nationally renowned expert in higher education policy and strategy development. Kristin's 30-year career, she doesn't look like, she must have started when she was 12, includes work at the federal and state levels where she focuses on policies that improve opportunity and economic mobility, particularly for first-generation students like herself and like me. Kristin co-founded HCM Strategist in 2008 because she believes in the power of policy solutions that integrate effective storytelling, rigorous analysis, and sharp insights and politically sensitive strategy. Kristin, it's such a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you.
And next is Jessica Todtman. She is the interim president of the National Association of Higher Education Systems, as we all know, NASH. In this role, she works to advance prosperity for the nation by leveraging her strong foundation in education policy and strategic leadership. Jessica has led efforts to have the organization become a more sustainable and effective organization. And she has an incredible background. It would go on for quite some time, but having worked in the SUNY system under a couple of governors, etc. Again, let me just thank Jessica for being here. And in particular, we are so blessed. I wish we had 3 hours to talk to the three of you, but we don't. We have an hour. So I'm going to jump right in. So starting off, at Trellis Strategies, we base our work around helping entities understand and adapt to the modern learner. As evidenced in the Student Financial Wellness Survey report that just came out a couple weeks ago, most students, what we call as modern learners, work while enrolled, maybe older than 25, maybe supporting children or other dependents as well. So students can be struggling to balance and prioritize these responsibilities alongside their academics. And that's what really we mean when we say modern learner. So as I mentioned, our student financial wellness survey results recently came out, and it identified this issue that affording a post-secondary education is increasingly challenging for learners. 71% of all respondents to our survey revealed that they had faced financial challenges while in college. And so I'm going to give you a couple of data points just for context of our discussion. Respondents face higher rates of financial fragility, with 56% reporting that they would have trouble obtaining $500 in cash or credit to meet an unexpected expense. And 68% reported that they had run out of money at least once since the beginning of the year. Students turn to public assistance programs and sometimes rely on credit cards to manage these financial challenges. However, among those who said they had experienced financial challenges, almost half reported difficulties concentrating on their schoolwork due to their financial situation. So when we're talking about affordability, we're not just talking about the finances of it. We're talking about the entire educational experience. So with that as a background, and since Justin's up on my screen, I'm going to start with him. How do you define affordability in post-secondary education, Justin?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And thanks very much for having us here today, Deb. And just want to say a kudos to Trellis. The survey findings that you put out consistently year after year are so helpful in sort of drawing this picture around affordability, because at Strata, we think about our vision is really, and mission is really thinking about education to opportunity, education to work. And we sort of need a definition of affordability that is both measurable and personal. So the measurable piece at Strata, I would say we use sort of a benchmark. It's not perfect, but the measurable piece around affordability is, what does it take a learner to afford? And we use public institutions as a benchmark in each and every state. And we do that through our state opportunity index. So if people were to go out and Google that, they'd be able to find our measure of affordability. That's the measurable piece. The way we do it is we say if a student works 40 hours a week during the summer and has to work part-time throughout the school year, and we use the average wages for a college student in that state, how much would they have to work? And if they have to work less than 10 hours a week, we would call them leading. If it's 10 to 20 hours a week, that state would be advanced. If it's 20 to 30, we say they have some work to do. And if it's more than 30, well, they're at a foundational level. It's one measure, but we know there's some limitations in there. The second part, though, is personal. And I think this is where your metrics really pay a lot of dividends, because we know that the personal piece is more than just any sort of dollar and cents metric. It's hard to tell anyone who's earning $30,000 to $50,000 a year that their net price is affordable when it's going to consume 20 to 50% of their annual earnings. And so that's why definitions of affordability have to sort of center on a lived experience. And we can't just focus on the measurable piece. We actually have to focus on the perceptions of affordability, because that impacts high school choices that folks are making around curriculum and course choices. That impacts all sorts of college going decisions and post-secondary education choices that folks will make along the way. I have more to say about that, but I think I should pause here and maybe see what you or my co-panelists have to say.
I have so many questions about that, but I'm going to see if Jessica has anything to add, especially since you mentioned state universities.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I want to echo the thanks. It's so great to be here with such a distinguished group and to be talking about this critically important topic. I'm not going to repeat anything of what Justin said, but just to add to that, I think on the personal side, and I really appreciate that perspective, there's also an opportunity cost. What is the person not doing if they're choosing to go to college, and is it worth that cost to them? They shouldn't have to sacrifice basic needs or dignity. I know a student teacher who grew up to be a school superintendent who lived in their car and cleaned hotel rooms because they had to give up their other part-time work to take on student teaching. And so I'm sure we'll get to a conversation about work-based learning and other interventions, but you shouldn't have to sacrifice dignity to afford college and to be able to get through the program of your choice.
Anything you want to add, Kristin?
I'll add that we did some work with Edge Research that Gates Foundation supported, 2 different types of focus groups and surveys in both 22 and 23. We talked to 18 to 30-year-olds who were neither enrolled in college or they may have started and not continued on. And so they themselves are by definition a modern learner. And they, to Justin's point, said it's who they hear from. And just the power of positive stories. It does sound surprising, but this constant deluge of negativity and some of higher ed shortcomings are landing in a place where people are choosing not then to look harder at how to finance it. So I really just want to reinforce that's exactly what the students are telling us.
Yeah, thanks, Kristin. I want to go back to something Justin touched on, and this came through in our research as well, and that's how students identify themselves. Our survey results showed that about 2/3 of respondents worked to pay while they were enrolled. Many of these working students worked full-time. 43% of the respondents worked full-time or held more than one job, 25%. And over a third identified, 36% identified primarily as a worker first and a student second, as opposed to a student first and a worker second. And this will give, I think, although I'm going to start with Kristin because she's up on my screen, but you want to talk a little bit about when you hear that description, especially about those identifying as workers first and students seconds. How does that influence how we should think about affordability? Oh, you're on mute, Kristin.
That's exactly what it said. Pardon me. You know, your question is on a lot of our minds as we look at what Congress is proposing in the reconciliation bill that's beginning to wind through. And specifically, yes, your data need to be kind of fully internalized by universities and their governing boards. So they are workers first. When we look at increasing credit requirements of students, and we say they must, kind of be on track to graduate in 4 years or otherwise complete 30 credit hours a year. If you're a worker first, that means an institution must transform in order for you to stay on track, honor your work commitments, and get that maximum Pell. And so I had a great conversation with Dr. Tim Rennick at Georgia State, where they've been able to get their average credit accumulation up to almost that 15-hour requirement. The average is 14 there at Georgia State, but they do block scheduling. And the faculty are assigned to teaching based on what working learners need because we don't have drop-in childcare, neither in this country nor on a college campus. And so block scheduling has been a critical way of how they've taken an expectation of 15 credit hours and really reduced borrowing and reduced time to degree.
Great, thanks, Kristin. I'm going to go to Jessica next.
Yeah, I think similarly to that, flexibility in academic pathways is really important. Getting a little less rigorous about what order you need to take courses in, getting a little less rigorous around, do we need minors, right? Or can we have a major and how can we fulfill that major creatively with work integrated learning, I think is really important. And also, I think when you have that mindset, which I think you're very fortunate to have in a classroom, someone who understands the world of work and hopefully what they're trying to get out of it, it puts the onus on us to make the learning especially relevant and applied affordable. I know when I had the privilege of returning to a master's program 6 years after being in the workforce, I had a lot stronger of an idea of what I was going to get out of my classroom learning. And I think we need to take advantage of that and help those students help us shape how we're guiding them through their learning.
Now, that's a good point, Jessica. When I returned from my master's, which was a number of years ago, one of the things that was challenging is that all of the administrative support offices were open from 9 to 5. I went to school in the evening. I worked all day. So I had to take time off of work to go meet with anybody in financial aid or anywhere else on the campus. And so it is thinking about all this differently. And as I turn this over to Justin, I'm going to add one other data point. I saw Mark Milliron at National University recently, and he told me a data point that came from some work he did at Gates that said only 19% of students enrolled today are your typical 18-year-olds out of high school. So I'm just going to throw that out there to add in for you to comment on, Justin, because I know this is something you've thought an awful lot about.
Well, yes, and I'm glad you said that because it's a perfect segue into looking at this through a lens that I think is important. One, the way this entire webinar is framed is institutions themselves can be change agents. And that's very much how I see this. We don't have to wait for public policy. We don't have to wait for states or the federal government to do something. Schools themselves can start implementing change today. We just have to have enough sort of institutional momentum, leadership, running throughout the institution to do it. The second is a lot of concern about the demographic cliffs that will come. Now, when exactly they'll hit and in which regions is a big question. And that'll depend on where you're located, the type of institution you are, but they will come. The two areas of post-secondary ed that are growing and have been growing for some time, dual enrollment and adult learners. I mean, that's where the growth is. And that almost is independent of where you are in the country. Doesn't matter. Those are the two growth areas. So it just makes sense that if you are looking to grow, that's where your market is. So adult learners, and dual enrolled students. So accelerated stackable programs, credit for prior learning, transfer systems that retain choice, reduce complexity, upfront tuition payments, work-based models that bring employers aligned with local employer needs. This is the pathway to success because we are seeing employers jumping into this game where they're funding upfront tuition models because there are severe shortages for healthcare workers. This is where there's growth and the ability for transformation around affordability.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Justin. I mean, we've seen large international companies, some of them based here in the US, creating their own programs, hiring kids out of high school and training them and skipping the whole college route, which may or may not be a solution, but it would make more sense that we use the infrastructure we already have in place to get institutions on board. So I'm going to jump from here into, because you spoke about something that really resonated with me, but starting to talk about interventions. I had the pleasure and honor of being the commencement speaker at El Paso Community College in December. And what I didn't realize, of the thousands of students that graduate, there were hundreds that were high school students that were also graduating with a 2-year degree from El Paso Community College. So thinking about that and thinking about affordability, and your comment, Justin, because I'm going to start with you because you made that comment about one of the ways to address affordability. Do you think that this is a path forward? I mean, I've always talked about, instead of K-12, does it need to be K-14? Or maybe it really is K-12, but we're taking care of the equivalent of maybe an associate's degree or some other type of technical education that would allow somebody to go right into a job. Because what we're hearing is a high school diploma is not enough. So I know we're going to talk about adults, but because you mentioned that, I'm jumping right on your comment there.
Yeah, I'm going to file, I think this is all an affordability play, and I'm going to file it all under reduced time to completion. Jessica talked at the top of this about opportunity cost. So adult learners or modern students, which I love that framing, are very acutely aware of this because anything that takes away time for them to work is something that has to be paid for another way. So this idea of the less time they spend in the classroom, the more time they can spend actually working and paying for their costs of living. So anything that reduces the time to completion, whether that's dual enrollment, whether that's a stackable credential that they can consistently build on, whether that's getting a head start in high school, all of those things fall for me, whether that's a college in 3 play, which we could talk about later, all of that is reducing time to completion. Getting the employer involved so that while they're working, they're actually building the skills that they can receive a competency-based education credit for. All of those reduce the time to completion. The faster that schools jump into partnership on all of those plays, they win, the students win. It's an affordability play.
Yeah, agreed. And Jessica, I'm going to jump in with you because of your organization, and I know it's systems heads, but your members must be talking about this, right? All of
Yeah,
us.
we are. So collectively, there are, depending on how you define them, between 80 and 100 systems in the country, and they're educating about 75% of public four-year undergrads, right? Just the scale is enormous. Our members alone represent over 700 institutions and over 8 million students. And when we talk about modern learners, one of the conversations we've been increasingly having, and it goes to the point that Justin's making about dual enrollment, is that we might be in a post-transfer world. We used to treat transfer students as these specific, different, we need policies for them. About 20%, depending who's counting, of community college students across the nations are dual enrollment students. In Iowa, it's over 40% of their community college enrollees are dual enrollment students. So treating transfer like a niche issue, like something we can fix if we have time to worry about those special students who are doing this different thing, is not where we are. We have to treat all students like they are coming in with some kind of credit, either earned from dual enrollment, earned from a prior learning assessment, from the military. We just need to be, as we talk about transformation, reorganizing our systems to treat transfer and bringing in credit from outside of the institution as the new normal. And we talk about reducing time to degree and respecting what students bring to the institution with them. I think that's critically important, and it's going to be a growing issue. And we at Nash are so laser focused on transfer because we think it's one of those problems that systems are uniquely positioned to solve. An individual institution obviously has students at the center of their work, but they have some concerns about their institutional boundaries. They don't want to lose that student. But at the system level, if we keep the student within the system, which in a place like SUNY, it's an extremely comprehensive student system. There's nothing you can't learn at the State University of New York. It's something that systems can do in a way an individual institution may not have the incentives and opportunities to work on. So it's something that's a high priority for us.
Great. I have something I want to come back to you on, Jessica, but I want to get Kristin in here because Kristin, this is the type of work you're doing, right? With states, systems, institutions, really looking at, as Jessica mentioned, the policies or the changes that can happen. Do you want to chat a little bit about your experience and some examples that you might have?
Sure. I come to this thinking that, no, these old ideas are new again, but we have to look at the cost structures of higher education. As a chair of a HSI here in Colorado, we can look, as Justin says, at the different strategies and pathways that students deserve, that value their time, that value their prior learning. It all makes for less revenue. So we have to adjust our costs. And so I'm interested both as a kind of state policy wonk, but also as a board chair. So the University of North Carolina benefited from a investment by its legislature in a faculty buyout program. And so for eligible faculty in close to retirement in low productivity majors, low demand majors, low productivity courses, they were offered one-time payments to get out of their contract, to get out of their tenure and to retire early. And then the UNC is coming in behind and hiring employees by contract. At the end of the day, that's where a lot of our costs are. It's very difficult to say, but I run this, and that's my largest source of cost. So you've got to look at designing first for what students need, and then recognizing that will cause a reallocation of spending, potentially less spending. And so how do you make those adjustments? So how do we give institutions some degrees of freedom managerially to do that? And so, like I said, a UNC system's interesting. We also see places like Louisiana where there's a new dollar going into financial aid, as Justin said. They're financing for the outcome we desire, not just student-centered funding or performance funding, but really we'll pay for the credit. We'll pay the credential, we'll pay for the certification earned. So Virginia has way more demand from students for their workforce grant. And it's a one-third pay for model, but it's not a la carte credit hours, and it's not a la carte courses. It is for that credential that's in labor market value, or demand, and the Virginia Community College System comes in behind and recognizes now part of its cost models to make sure low-income students, their one-third is paid for. So I really don't think we can We can a la carte our way to this. That's why HCM is so interested in helping scale ASAP, because ASAP at its core is a transformation model, changes college culture, puts belonging at the center, transforms academic advising, transforms student scheduling. It gives students monthly stipends. Now all we need to do is borrow from Alabama, who uses AI to screen every single modern learner's resume and sit for some exams to understand what skills they may already have, and then transcript that credit.
That's incredible. I'm going to pick up on something you talked about. Well, you didn't. You moved past it, but I want to bring Jessica back in. Here in Texas, which I know Kristin is very familiar with, we passed House Bill 8 a year or so ago, which means all of our community colleges, all 50, are on performance-based funding. Or outcomes-based funding, really, not performance-based, but outcome-based funding. Is that something, Jessica, that you see your members talking about at all in terms of looking at from a state funding perspective, or do you think you're hearing more about this idea that money should go to those who are really delivering the outcomes that education is designed to do?
Yeah, it is happening in more states than not, but not necessarily universally, right? So I think the latest report I saw was that from the SHIO, the State Higher Ed Exec Officers, they have a 2022 report that cites that 32 states are doing some version of performance-based funding in at least one sector. So it's definitely not just an idea, and it's something that's happening. And I would say it's happening a lot quicker than in my experience in K-12 I've ever seen funding models kind of pick up speed and energy and attention. I think that the results are extremely mixed or early. We're not necessarily seeing what the best version of performance-based funding is or what the best measures we should use. And those measures look different in different places. In some places, it's based on types of students. And in some states, they are having current conflicts with laws that were passed around how you are and are not allowed to target programs and how their performance-based funding was designed to target certain student groups, right? Those conversations are happening right now in some states as a result of action taking this legislative session. So it's something that's very real for a lot of states and systems. It is something that is being designed differently, and I don't think today we have the answer on that it's working. But it also raises an important question of, and especially in this moment, of what we think higher ed was designed to do. And I don't have any doubt that we invite students in to our organizations, to our campuses, to our programs to give them a better future. But I think we're getting down the road towards a conversation where is there a student with a certain level of privilege who's allowed to go to a liberal arts college and study philosophy or whatever you think that non-career connected learning path may be. And they're allowed to do that because they can afford college or their family can help them afford college. But a student who has a certain set of needs and circumstances, their learning must be expressly and intimately connected to a specific job outcome, right? That they need to, that's what college is for them. And I want us to be very careful about not creating those two worlds where someone gets to go to college to explore and someone has to go to college to go right back into the workforce tomorrow. That might be their choice. That may be their economic reality. But I think it's incumbent upon us on policymakers to make sure we're not going too far in either direction.
Yeah, not creating a split. And I'm going to come back to this in a minute, but I want to bring this last point you made, but I want to bring Justin in because of the State Opportunity Index and the work that Strata is doing around looking at outcomes. And in particular, how should we measure outcomes? How do we know that there's a quality education, people are getting a good, I'm sorry, I'm going to use this word, Jessica, it's probably going to be ROI, like that their money is spent in a good way and they're getting the outcome they desire?
So ROI is certainly top of mind for students, at least in the surveys that we're doing. And we're in the middle of a qualitative, and then it'll be followed by a quantitative study on affordability. And it seems pretty clear, at least in the qualitative portion, that ROI is top of mind for all students, parents, prospective students. So at least that's one dynamic. Individually, they want to make sure that what they're putting in, they will get out. And that's true of students who are in the humanities as much as it is students that are enrolled in STEM. We're not seeing any difference there, although the timeline might be a little bit different in what they're expecting. But the other part of ROI is what policymakers are expecting. And I think we have to think about both of those things, although they are separate and distinct. And I think we have to pay attention to both. So as the public invests, whether that's through state appropriation or even at the federal level, there should be some expectation of ROI back to the public. And some of that's going to be a little bit indirect in a more engaged citizenry or healthy citizenry. And some of that's going to be a little bit more direct in a stronger tax base, employment alignment. But I think we have to think about both. I'm going to try to tie that back into one thing that Jessica just talked about, though, which is specifically at the state level, when states are thinking about their goals, and states can have separate goals. One might be focusing very much on retention and completion. Another might be thinking very much about outcomes based at the technical or community college level, like Texas with their performance-based funding. Another might be thinking about access. States, as they have limited budgets that must balance, which is a little bit different than at the federal level, and as some of those states become much more constrained during limited economic cycles, they face a choice, whether they're going to try to accomplish multiple things or one thing. And then they have to decide, are we really going to focus on this one thing with some sort of performance-based, outcomes-based funding model? And they can be very specific and try to move that state towards that thing, whatever that goal is. The challenge is, of course, we know with performance-based funding, because it's been around for a long time, that you might then, if you're focused on outcomes, limit access. That's an argument that's been around for a long time. I think there's some sophistication around that. The other issue, as we're thinking about institutional transformation, is the more focused you make your funding, the more risky you make it for institutions to try anything risky. Like if I know as an institution, my funding is tied to this very specific thing, and I'm getting my funding for that thing, in some ways I'm disincentivized from experimenting because I don't want to put any of my funding at risk. So there's another dynamic here at play that we just have to be careful about in our state funding models. That's one we've talked to a couple states about in the last year, and institutions as well. Schools get very touchy about, boy, I certainly don't want to mess with my state funding model, because that impacts how well I can serve my students.
Yeah, that's, it's interesting. I was shocked that we got all 50 community colleges in the state to agree with this House Bill 8 for performance-based outcome. You would have never thought you could have gotten them all on board, which is pretty amazing. I want to bring Kristin in now because I know you've dealt with a number of different states. And the thing that I'm hearing, and maybe this is just how my news is getting filtered to me, Kristin, is that a lot of state and community colleges are looking at job shortage areas and in need careers where there just aren't enough people to fill them, and that is driving a lot of the policy at the state level. Is that right? Or are you seeing different things happening, Kristin?
Yeah. Gosh, at the state level, I don't think I do think workforce is driving higher education conversations. I don't think in-demand jobs is solely driving conversations when you look at what are the subject of hearings, how do the dollars flow, who are we appointing to boards, what kind of legislation are we running? I see states trying to value time, as Justin and Jessica have spoken to so clearly. So I see states like Colorado and Virginia making it an expectation of high school graduation that you'll have about 15 credits, 30 credits transcripted towards graduation, so that there is an opt-out expectation. Everyone will be on this path to blend high school and college. So I see that happening more. I definitely know states are moving to improve their data systems. And so they're anxious to see what the feds will do to protect investments in state level data systems, to enhance their UI wage record systems, to partner with entities like Lightcast so they can have platforms to do some projections. I see an emerging conversation I facilitate with Eloy Oakley in California, a working group. It's a working group of the Commission on the American Workforce that's hosted by the Bipartisan Policy Center. And we're elevating durable skills. And so I think the danger is transformation is scary, as Justin just referred to. Some things will be changed, and change is hard to manage and has a tremendous historical and human component, which are both valued. So I think it's important to really guard against either or conversations. And we try very hard at MSU Denver to keep I was thinking about the deceased Pope Francis is like, I value unity over everything. We really are valuing unity as we move towards transformation for outcomes. And I say this is that to say, oh, it's only in demand, well, then you can go, but then we don't value liberal arts. And so we're really trying to avoid, take personal responsibility at the board level for making sure that, no, we must value time differently, and we must adjust our costs, and durable skills are valuable, not just current in-demand projected careers.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more with the durable skills piece of this. That's, I think it's in some cases more critical than anything else that you might learn for being successful in your career. I wanted to bring Jessica back in, and you know, as we talk about different models and transformation, which is difficult. How do we ensure, to your point, equity and access for all students? Getting back to your division point, Jessica, of we want to make sure that. So how do we solve for that?
I think there are a lot of different ways that we're seeing people solve for that, and I think it's highly contextual. I think one of the things we've been trying to lead on the way, lead with our members, is talking about social mobility and economic opportunity, talking about the ways that an educated citizenry uplifts the whole state. Right, you're more likely to pay taxes, more likely to vote, less likely to rely on public service, less likely to end up in prison, all of these things that I'm sure everyone on this call is well aware of. This is why we do this work. And I think it comes down to, in a lot of ways, on messaging, right? We started, Justin was talking about the perception, right? And who we're getting those messages from and which of the messages are sticking. I think there's also a message to be had about access. I think there's a great conversation going on right now about rural access. I saw an article just today about an increasing demand for community colleges to offer bachelor's degrees, because community colleges are often the closest to populations that need those opportunities. And if they can't access those other things locally, they're not going to be able to achieve that. And so I think equity is much broader than we have ever thought about it before. And I think keeping that broadly inclusive approach to what does it look like to uplift our whole citizenry as a symbol of statewide prosperity is a really important conversation, and one that I think can land with diverse audiences.
Yeah, no, that's great. And Justin, I want to bring you back in around something that you brought up, which has to do with employers or organizations, businesses, and to the extent that they are benefiting from all this. Do you think that they're willing? I mean, yes, we have tuition reimbursement programs and all of that, but do you think that they're willing to invest other ways? And I've seen this happen at a couple of institutions in Texas. But are there other ways that you think that they could be investing to help address this issue of affordability, especially for those who are first gen, come from a lower income background?
Well, that's like the $1 million, maybe $1 billion question.
That's why I asked you, Justin.
What employers consistently complain about is finding qualified people to fill open positions that they have. And that's true across traditional trade jobs, all the way up to traditional college positions. But what they'll actually pay for is another question. And so where we actually are seeing success and where employers are willing to step forward and pay and is in like two areas. One is like where there are extreme shortages. So nursing stands out, where we are seeing healthcare systems partner with both states and institutions. Texas is one example where they're willing to like fill the gap for licensure programs or pre-licensure programs. WGU stands out where they've announced a partnership with a healthcare system in Texas, where the employer is stepping forward, covering all of the expenses, including the non-billable expenses, which is something that your survey, financial wellness survey,
Yeah.
talks about very competently, that is a real burden on students, and fills that gap for them. So the students have no upfront out-of-pocket expenses. Now, there is the back end if they don't fulfill their employment requirements, which is somewhere around 3 to 5 years, the students then accept the burden, but at a 0% interest rate. But that's where we see at least employers stepping forward. The second is on short-term sort of credentialed programs that are non-Title IV eligible. That whole marketplace, though, is just a little bit all over the map and tough to map, if I can use that word twice. So we are seeing employers step up and fill that gap. But again, you have a employment requirement on the back end, which sometimes can feel a little punitive to students if they're locked in. So it's a great question, Deb. And when employers really feel the squeeze, when they just can't find people to fill their needs, they will step up and pay. But it has to be a definitive benefit to that employer.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think Kristin wants to jump in here. She had her, I can tell by taking herself off mute, around partnerships that you're seeing, Kristin.
Yeah, and I would like to, at that point, also integrate one of the questions from one of our guests today in there. We have been in a season, that our commenter says, that we have been spending less per student in most states than we did when the GIs first came home. And so we can't recognize that it's good for our nation's economic capacity. It's good for our communities and it's good for families if they have advanced education. And that education conveys durable skills. It is not good for people to start and start and drop out with debt and no degree. So how do we renew this public commitment that we will create pathways that value your time, convey transparent skills, do not graduate you into poverty. And for that, we must spend more public dollars and spend them better. And so this more juice for the squeeze place we've been in for a long time is not sustainable. There are indeed structural deficits in states that require tax structure adjustment. And there are indeed at the federal level. So we've heard last week from CBO, there's a 16% structural deficit at the federal level. And this occurs at the state level. We make commitments that we cannot keep. And we pay, frankly, in this country for healthcare before we pay, which is an expense, before we pay for education, which is an investment. So there is absolutely kind of a moral reckoning around what all of this costs. I just don't think politically or pragmatically we'll get it if we don't transform at the same time.
Yeah.
So we don't get transformation through outcomes-based funding. We have to invest, as Justin was alluding to, in transformation, and then recognize the fruits of that through some funding formula.
Yeah, it does take a huge risk, a big jump, a big leap for institutions or systems to move in this direction. I just noticed we're getting low on time, so there is a couple more questions, and then we'll see what else we have there. This one I'll hit on really quickly, and this goes back to, I think, something that Jessica was talking about, this split. Is at Trellis, we believe that post-secondary education is a journey for students that is no longer linear. In other words, you don't come out of high school, immediately go to 4 years of college, get out and get a degree. It is an in and out process. And what we call dropping out may not be dropping out. It may be pausing for a reason and then coming back. And it may be work related. It may be a financial situation or something like that. Can you all speak, and I'm going to start with Jessica, about how this impacts conversations about affordability if we look at students differently than we have traditionally looked at them? And really, and this is an old saying, which is lifetime learning, but as technology continues to advance in the way that it is, we have to look at this as a nonlinear path, right? A nonlinear journey.
Yeah, I think there have been really interesting conversations and great policy strides made around reverse transfer, right? Taking a student who may have been viewed as a stop out or dropout and saying, hey, it turns out you actually had 60 credits. Maybe we can help you transfer and earn that associate's degree.
Right.
We partnered with a family foundation in California and did some work with the 3 California public systems to identify ways that they were removing costs as a barrier. And one of my favorites came from Cal Poly Humboldt, where they came up with something they called the individualized degree plan, which is basically they saw they had a whole lot of students who had 120 credits and no bachelor's degree. And they were saying, instead of going to the student and saying, hey, here's your checklist of the 9 classes you didn't get or the 3 classes you didn't get for your major, they said, how can we sit down with you and come up with a way that this can qualify you for your bachelor's degree? How can we create an individualized program for you? And I think that is the mindset of flexibility that we need to be meeting students with, especially as they're returning different periods in their life for different reasons. I also think that Trellis is a great leader in showing institutions, faculty, advisors, the kind of data they need to be making these decisions and informing their policy. One of my close colleagues at the National Association for NASPA, the Student Affairs Professionals, is that when you want to include student voice, the students who have time to come to the table are probably not the students who need your help the most. And so if that student's going to take an evening off of work to come to your focus group, how are you going to compensate them for that? How are you going to make space to listen to the students who most need your help to inform those policies and update the assumptions you're making about where students are coming from and where they're going? And I also think as we consider partnerships with employers, we need to really think about reskilling. There was a time when I was working at the SUNY system where an employer would say to us, well, I'm going to have to train them anyway, right? Yeah, I could come sit down with your faculty and help co-design this program, but I know when they get here, I'm going to put them in my 3-month program anyway, so just don't bother. How are we recreating those conversations? How are we helping industry promote people, skill up from within, and how can we be a part of that lifelong educational journey, not just getting you to the finish line that we first saw for you when you came to us?
Yeah, that's great. I couldn't agree more, Jessica. Justin, anything you want to add to this concept of a nonlinear learner?
Yeah, it's a little heavy, so I'm just going to do it real quick, but it is heavy. And I want to say, Deb, I'm an institutionalist at heart. I've been representing institutions for 20 years. So I say this with love. We don't make it easy for learners at any level, really, to understand our processes, start to finish. So if we really want to we have to align education with students' lived realities. And students will keep coming back if they trust us. And unfortunately, what we're seeing in poll after poll is we are losing a lot of trust. And if we want to build that confidence, rebuild that trust, we have to provide sort of that quality coaching all along their journey, knowing that they might stop out and come back, stop out and come back. We have to have clear program level data so that we are telling them upfront what their likely outcomes will be. And we have to have room for personal and non-financial reasons for them to pursue and afford our educations. And we've always known, well, we've known for a long time, complexity impedes access. But I think what we have to start internalizing is that complexity also destroys trust. So we have to really focus on making our enrollment management modeling, our affordability pricing strategies much, much simpler. We're working on ways for schools to do that. And I'll just leave it there for now.
That's another whole
That's
discussion.
a whole other thing. Yes.
But what I think I heard from you and Jessica is what we need to do is put the student first and the student experience first, and then build to that, as opposed to, and I love our institutions as well, building for what process makes it easier for us to administer things, or what works best with our faculty, or what works best. We have to think about it totally differently. Kristin, anything more you want to add in there?
You know, I've been attending these kind of statewide summits recently, and the last one I did in California, we had the head of LinkedIn's he says, I'm the only economic mobility VP in the country. And I thought, I don't know if that's the case, but nonetheless, his lunchtime plenary was excellent. And he talked about that AI is going to transform work. What would a webinar be if we didn't mention AI? Bingo.
Yes.
Is that it's going to transform work and already is. It's coming after office jobs. It's coming after the types of kind of human-centered professions that we thought were otherwise protected. And so rather than say that post-secondary education has to look at those adults whose work is being so transformed and understand how to utilize AI and respond to it in ways that promote innovation, value humanity. And it's going to just take an incredible amount of creativity and ingenuity. So back to like my last thing I'd say is Justin's point, and I think just the leadership Jessica and her system heads demonstrate is we can't be afraid to do things very differently when learners are at the center of it.
Yep, agreed. Andrea, I have one last question, but I'm just going to pop in and see if we have any questions you want to bring forward. I know that Kristin addressed one of them.
Yes, it would just be this other one in the Q&A. Can you please address the balance between achieving what we as a society think it means to be educated and reduced time to completion? And how is this reduction in time so that we can work more, perhaps not the best path forward for our democracy?
Well, I had a colleague who once said that education is the only thing people will pay more to get less of, right? How quickly can I complete this program? That happens a lot if you're looking at professional programs or executive-driven programs. And I do think that's the question I was getting at earlier of Justin even mentioned 3-year degrees. I think 3-year degrees and the movement that's happening is very well thought out and really intentional. And there are a lot of people, well, how could it possibly only take 3 years? But on the same breath, I was in K-12 for 5 years, and we are accepting and embracing, and in some states, as Kristin said, promoting a version of K-12 that is saying that the high school experience need only be 2 years. And so I do think that we have to get away from the status quo for the sake of the status quo. And if we can keep the conversation based on student learners and their aspirations and the goals they're trying to meet, I think we can find policies that work to get at that question of not only what students need, but what our society and our democracy expects to be able to uphold with our population. But it is a pressure. I don't think it has to be at odds, though.
Agreed. Anything, Kristin or Justin, you want to add to that? I will say our Trellis 360 discussion series last month, we heard from a couple of institutions, one who has shortened the semester to 8 weeks, which was phenomenal because it greatly minimized people stopping out, because at 4 weeks they were like, oh, it's only a month left, I can do this. The other is throwing out the agrarian calendar and going year round and getting it done much faster. So I think it's those types of things, Jessica, that you talked about, is just thinking differently about how we deliver education. And to Kristin's earlier point about what is actually needed, what do we actually need? So I'm going to finish with one question, which is always my favorite question. And that is, if you had a magic wand and you could do one thing, only one, sorry, I'm limiting it to one, or institute one policy at the federal or state level that would address affordability, what would it be and why? And I'm going to let you decide who wants to start. Guess I should have thrown this one out ahead of time.
Okay.
Kristin, you look like you're ready.
I'll go first. We've walked alongside legislative leaders in the governor's office in Illinois for the last 2 years, and they are fundamentally concerned about how do we get more resources to the learners and the institutions that have been historically under-resourced. And they take into effect, we've been building a model, and we take into account the mix of programs and the mix of students and what we expect people to pay and what kind of revenue we expect to be able to generate. All long story to say is I would use my wand to change how the state budget environment in Illinois looks so they can afford to invest in this model that puts adequacy and equity at its center. And I would want to see every state be able to do that with companionship from the federal government.
Thank you, Kristin.
I'm always apt to cheat on these, so I'm going to cheat and then give you my answer. I'm trying to decide between having institutions create conditions so that institutions could all walk away from a tuition discounting model so that pricing is just absolutely clear.
That's what it is. Yeah.
Okay. Or, and I'll settle with this one, or a completely reinvigorated campus-based program, which has everything that everybody says they want, Republicans and Democrats, an institutional match with skin in the game, a reinvigorated work-based learning program that would trickle down from the feds to the states to the institutions and incorporate quality coaching on every campus and give every student a work-based learning experience. So that's what I would love to see, a reinvigorated, reinvested campus-based aid program.
Thanks, Justin. Jessica?
This is really going to betray how nerdy and process oriented I am. But one of my favorite thing Nash does is we host these improvement communities where we work with teams from institutions from a single system to look at their processes. And they start with a process map. And they have to process map and through the student's eyes, right? To Justin's point, what are we putting the students through? And let's not pretend we're not putting them through something, right? And how is that intersecting? And we found one where they said, okay, at this point, the transfer credit goes to the dean for approval. And it sits there for 2 weeks. So they called that dean and they said, Dean, what are you doing with those documents? And he says, my assistant is signing them. I don't have time to look at them. And so they got rid of that step of their process. And so this is not a state policy, but what I would beg of our institutions and our systems and all public agencies is to say, if we have the information, how could we not collect it again? I got so mad when I was working at the State Department of Ed in Nevada, and every time we gave districts a form, we asked for their address. If we don't know the address of the 17 school districts in our state, shame on us. One of our California examples, I spoke about that project we did, was that they started giving students automatic waivers based on need. They had fee waivers for course registration, for housing, for all these things. We know if they have need, we're giving them financial aid based on that need. Let's not make them ask for it again. And so thinking through your processes through the lens of the student, through the lens of how can we stop asking for things we have, how can we stop putting them through processes that we know where they're going to end up, would make a huge difference in rebuilding the trust that Justin spoke of and having them access the resources that they're entitled to.
Great, and we have 1 minute left, so I'm going to share my magic wand moment, and that would be, and you're going to laugh at this, that every institution in the country be a co-op institution like Northeastern or Drexel. That every single one have a work-based learning component where you go to school for 6 months, you go to work for 6 months, and when you're working, that pays your tuition. I think it solves all the problems. I have never understood why that has not taken off more, but that would be my magic wand moment. And with that, I just want to say a huge, sincere thank you to Justin, Kristin, Jessica for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. We could have gone on so much longer, but we will just break it into future 360 discussions and invite you all back. Thank you very much for being with us today. And to our audience, thank you for sticking with us through today's discussion. We appreciate it.